Hello and welcome to our monthly multidisciplinary webinar hosted by ICAT, ISPI Potomac, and the Professionista LLC. This month's topic is applying lean agile methodology for organizational improvement. We will begin shortly, but in the meantime, we invite you to join us in the chat. Please provide your full name so that we can greet you, as well as where you are joining us from. We know that many of our guests are tuning in not only from the US, but overseas as well. So please do share your city and country with your name so that we can see just how global our reach has become. So we want to take some time to acknowledge those of you who are joining us live. Welcome, Michael from Clarksburg, MD, as well as Guy from Lenoir, North Carolina. Hello there, Marcia from Arlington, VA. Welcome, welcome, as well as Molly from Washington, DC. We also welcome Gabe from beautiful Springfield, Virginia, Jenna from Davenport, Florida, Tony from Durban, South Africa, Mina from Alexandria, Balete from Buffalo, New York, Jay from Maryland, and all of our other live guests. We welcome you and we appreciate you for joining us here today. So if you are tuning in live and you haven't already done so, please do let us know your full name and where you're tuning in from in the chat box so that we can greet you in the chat. Now, this monthly multidisciplinary webinar is one that we host on the fourth Thursday of every month at noon Eastern Time. It is intended for professionals and leaders who want to develop a multidisciplinary awareness of various disciplines, ranging from emerging and trending technologies, organizational improvement, engineering, data analytics, social transformation, and other topics. The webinar is recorded and circulated for the benefit of professionals who are within our circle. This webinar is hosted every month by ICAT Professional Services. Now, did you know that ICAT Professional Services is a social enterprise with a purpose to enhance employability and to create jobs in our community? That's right, ICAT Professional Services is an organization that is committed to making your people and data greater. ICAT Consulting is your partner for professional development, talent source, data analytics, and societal impact. Service offerings include Career Academy, outsourcing, staffing and recruitment, applied data analytics, and social enterprise. To learn more about ICAT Consulting, please do visit www.icat.net. ICAT also offers the following 5 credentialed programs: Scaled Agile, POPM, CompTIA A+, CompTIA Network Plus, CompTIA Security Plus, and Agile Instructional Design Practitioner. So for you career seekers who are tuning in, you may be wondering how to make yourself stand out from the stack of other resumes and those vying for the opportunities that you seek. While credentials and skills may get you in the door, employment readiness is what makes you stand out from other candidates in the minds of interviewers and decision makers, which is why ICAT also offers a series of employment readiness experiences that prepare you to stand out. These include certification exam prep, portfolio development, informational interviews, cohort peer support, coaching support, and professionalism development. So if you would like to know more about how ICAT takes a job seeker from novice to a highly trained professional, please visit www.icat.net. ICAT is also co-sponsoring an upcoming training with ISPI Potomac on Scaled Agile Product Owner, Product Manager, or POPM for short. This special training takes place on June 8th through the 11th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time each day. If you're looking to sharpen your skills in Scaled Agile POPM, visit the ICAT website or ISPI website for more information and registration details. Now, these enriching monthly multidisciplinary webinars wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. We will now share a few details about our sponsor organizations. And as we share, please do feel free to take a screenshot of the companies and organizations that you would like to connect with. First, we have ISPI Potomac. ISPI Potomac is the professional home for innovative leaders, educators, consultants, and designers in federal, state, and local government, as well as international development, education, and non-government organizations around the world. Members of ISPI Potomac share a commitment to community, collaboration, and co-creation to help make our world a better place for all. This webinar is also sponsored by my company, the Professionista LLC. The Professionista LLC brings your brand to life with creative storytelling and communication strategies that connect with your audience. From virtual events such as this one to in-person experiences, I, the company's founder, I speak life into your content and your strategy in a way that is compelling, enriching, and memorable. The Professionista LLC provides brand storytelling strategy, communication strategy and content, empowerment keynotes, and voice-over artistry. Because what's a communication strategy without a powerful voice to deliver it? So if you or your organization needs the right voice, a powerful voice to carry your message to the market in a way that makes you unforgettable and makes them want to work with you, text your organization's name now with the word voice to 678-694-7763 today. We so appreciate our illustrious sponsors, and we couldn't provide this service to the community without them. So we appreciate them, and we'll share the next exciting webinar that's to be sponsored by our illustrious sponsors. On June 24th, 2021, at noon Eastern Time, we invite you to join us for our next webinar on the topic of engineering in everyday life, addressing the global grand challenges of the 21st century. From urban centers to remote corners of Earth, the depths of the oceans to space, humanity has always sought to transcend barriers, overcome challenges, and create opportunities that improve life in our part of the universe. In the last century alone, many great engineering achievements became so commonplace that we now take them mostly for granted. For example, technology allows an abundant supply of food and safe drinking water for much of the world. It provides electricity for many of our daily activities. We can travel the globe with relative ease and bring goods and services wherever they're needed. And as remarkable as these engineering achievements are, many more great challenges and opportunities remain to be realized. And our next webinar will explore the technological possibilities and engineering solutions that are just within our grasps, as well as some that lie just beyond our imaginations. Join us live to expand your horizons as our panel, comprised of emerging technological thinkers and thought leaders, discuss some of the grand challenges for engineering in the 21st century. From sustainability to health, security, and even the joy of living. Mark your calendars for June 24th at noon Eastern Time so that you don't miss this mind-expanding discussion. So for those of you who are joining us for this webinar, we provide you with several webinar tools that you can use to enhance your experience. We invite you to engage in the chat and share any questions, comments, suggestions, and more that you may have. And if time permits and we're able to open the floor for Q&A, you may raise your hand virtually to ask a question and use the unmute feature to ask your question live when you are called upon. We do ask that all video remains set to the off setting throughout the webinar and that audio remain on mute unless you're called on to speak. Keeping video and audio off helps to keep the focus on the presentation at hand. So we thank you in advance for honoring these standards. And if you're joining us from the Zoom mobile app or desktop site, the place to make your presence known is in our chat. Let us know what you think of the webinar in the chat area, and we appreciate your feedback and thank you for it in advance. And if you're joining us by dialing in from a phone, we encourage you to update your Zoom settings to display your name and where you're tuning in from instead of your phone number so that we can acknowledge you. Now, let's jump right into the main event. I am Jodianne Bigby, and I will be moderating today's panel on the topic, Applying Lean Agile Methodology for Organizational Improvement. Today's multidisciplinary webinar features experts in Lean Agile methodology. So first, you will hear from Maureen Quende, Senior Instructional Designer, who will speak on leveraging Agile methodology in instructional design. She will be followed by Dr. Max Cropper, PhD and CEO of 5-Star Performance Solutions, who will present on Lean Performance Improvement, Cropper's Lean Performance Management Model. And finally, you will hear from the webinar leader, Mr. Jonathan Tessier, Certified Professional Coach, who will round out the discussion with the topic, Agile Continuous Improvement and the need for visual management. So please join me in welcoming our first panelist, Ms. Maureen Quende. Maureen Quende is a seasoned learning and development professional with over 15 years of experience in learning and development. She partners with organizations to help them create organizational plans and custom learning programs from scratch that optimize their talent and gets a return on investment. She is a certified leadership coach, a seasoned public speaker, and host of the podcast Empowerment Minutes. Her areas of expertise range from leadership coaching and performance improvement to instructional design and training and development. Maureen, with the help of her team, pioneered in the virtual conference space and hosted an event online with over 5,000 attendees. This model has continued to be a success for the various clients that she serves in this space. She holds a prestigious Chief Learning Officer Executive Certification from George Mason University, which she obtained in 2018. She also holds a master's degree in instructional design and technology, and as well as a graduate e-learning certificate from George Mason University. She is working on her PhD candidacy and intends to graduate with a PhD in learning technologies from George Mason University in 2022. So Maureen, we welcome you to our virtual stage. How are you today?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm so excited to be here. While you were giving my introduction, I was thinking, that sounds really good. So I'm going to try to live up to my reputation for the next few minutes.
I'm sure you'll do a fabulous job.
Thank you so much for having me. I just want to thank everyone who's joined the webinar today. I hope we'll all, leave the webinar that we've learned something and that we can take with us to go and empower each other, even in our work or, in whatever networking opportunity that we find ourselves. So once again, welcome to this presentation. So we'll start by talking about Agile, and then we'll start with a brief background and talk about why Agile and why Agile instructional design. Then we would segue into 2 models. And from there, we'll talk about some key differentiators and conclude with how to leverage both for instructional design. So if you're thinking you were just going to come to this presentation and just listen, then you got it all wrong, because I'm going to encourage you to participate. As you lean forward and participate, that's how you're going to get fun out of it. So I'm going to ask you my first question, because when we think about the term Agile, it's been used a lot in our field of learning and development, also in IT software products, as well as project management. It's also very common in instructional design as well. So when you think about Agile, what are some of the keywords that come to mind? You know, if you can pop those in the chat area, I'll pause for a minute to see what you come up with. I'm sure you guys will come up with a great list. So if the host can help me, if there's anything in the chat area, let me know. I'm just going to take a look and see. So when you think about Agile, what are some of the keywords that come to mind? I can help you out. The first one that I would think about is collaboration. What are some of the keywords?
We have some feedback in the chat. Max says rapid prototyping. Jonathan said fast is what comes to mind for him. Tamrit says flexible design.
Okay.
Molly has shared flexible. Michael says effective. Belete has said flexible and adaptable.
That's wonderful. I mean, it's like you're just mind with us, right? Good job. I wish I could give you a prize. That's correct. When we think about Agile, I just realized I didn't have my camera on. So apologies for that. So when you think about Agile, we're thinking about keywords like collaboration, flexibility, results. We're thinking about quick turnaround time. We're thinking about cycles. We're thinking about iteration, right? And that's correct. When we think about Agile, we often think of high levels of collaboration and flexibility, as well as iterative environment in which requirements evolve, you know, alongside changing needs. So that's really what we think about when we are referring to Agile. So Agile development was created because traditional software methodologies were not flexible enough, they were not rapid enough. And the same reasoning applies to Agile instructional design. When we look at the traditional models, they were not, robust enough like people wanted. So that's how, the term Agile ever came to birth. If you'd like, you can go online and look for the Agile Manifesto, look at Agile values to educate yourself even more. But when we look at the background of Agile, there was a problem, right? There was a problem that Agile came to solve. So years ago, development teams, they used a waterfall approach, when they were developing products. So the way it was set up, the first step was, set up the project requirements and the scope of work. And then after that, what they did was they designed, the product based on what the requirements were. And from there, they built the product and tested the products. If there were any errors or any problems, they kind of resolved them and launched the finished product. So that's kind of the waterfall approach. But what happened was that could take years back then. It would take a lot of time. So think about if you're working on a product that you're planning to roll out to the market, and from the process, you don't get to release the product in like 2 years. So by the time it gets out, for example, the product will be obsolete, right? Because the market will no longer have a need for that product. So that's really, in essence, what happened, because they were not meeting the deadlines, they were not meeting the product requirements that they were looking for. So because of that, then Agile came about, and it's the same thing with instructional design. Okay, so if you can move to the next slide, please. So when we think about the waterfall approach, we're looking at different steps. We're looking at a linear approach where you start with a concept. From there, you look at the design, then you look at the development, then you test it, and then you roll it out. But it has to follow that structure, which means that you can't move from concept to test without going through design first and then going through development. And so this was not really working for most people. And that's how they came up with Agile, because with the Agile framework, there are different cycles that, that run from A to Z. You don't have to follow a structure. So that's why Agile, to me, it's really the go-to word out there in instructional design, in IT, in project management. Most people kind of lean towards Agile at this point. So there are some models that kind of mirror the waterfall approach. And the next one that I'm going to talk about is the ADDIE model. If you can go to the next slide, the ADDIE model was kind of like huge, If you have been in instructional design for a while, you will know that that's the most common. Like most people would go to ADDIE. ADDIE is like kind of like your girl's best friend. And ADDIE was created in 1975 by Florida State University. They created that model to, serve the Army. And the ADDIE model has, in essence, 5 steps, right? So it starts with A for A is analyze, design is the next one. Then the second, D stands for development, and then implementation and evaluation. So that's kind of the process that was put in place. But when it started in 1975, it had about 20 steps. So when you look at the timeline of ADDIE model, when you look at 1985, 1985 to 1991, it kind of like the steps have kind of like reduced from 20 to the 5 that we have at this point. So if you're, next slide. So if you're looking at developing a course, for example, then, you would want to start with A, which is the analysis, right? You want to be able to determine what's going on, uncover any blind spots, then be able to determine what's your audience, right? Then from there, you go ahead and start, putting together your storyboard, putting together your prototype, which would be the design phase. And when you're happy with that, then you go and start developing your product. And when you have your product developed, then you go ahead and test it out. And then implementation is when you're rolling out the pilot of the product. And then in the end, you're going to evaluate it and conduct a summative evaluation to determine how your product is doing. So most people still use the ADDIE model, and we're going to talk about some key differentiators coming up in the next minute. But this model is not antiquated per se. People still use it. There are still some benefits of the ADDIE model that I'm going to talk about shortly. So in the next slide, it's another example of, of the Agile framework. And this is SAM. And so most people use the SAM because they feel it was created to be a replacement, I wouldn't say replacement, but looking at the shortcomings of ADDIE, that's why SAM was created. And so instead of having 5 steps, it has 3 steps. So when you look at the 3 steps, it starts with still information gathering, which is similar to the analyze of ADDIE model, right? And from there, you go to the next phase, which is the iterative design phase, where you're looking at design, prototyping, and reviewing. And you can see on your screen that there's just those cycles, those arrows, right? Because you have different cycles that go on. And the last step is the development step, and then you deploy it. So from the arrows, it tells you that you don't have to stick with one. It has different cycles that can go back and forth. And that's why many people like the Agile or the SAM framework. Why? Because it takes a shorter period of time for you to be able to achieve your goals. So most people prefer the SAM for that method as a model over ADDIE. And I would still say this. Go to the next slide, please. I would still say that in my opinion, there are advantages and disadvantages of both methods, right? When you think about ADDIE, ADDIE, the benefits would include some people like structure, depending on what you're working on. It has less development costs. It's less ambiguous, right? And it's more cohesive. Those are some of the benefits of the ADDIE model. But when you look at the disadvantages, it lacks flexibility. It has a linear approach. You cannot skip from analyze and go all the way to develop without going to the other phases in the middle. However, with Agile, when we look at the benefits, it's constantly changing. It's flexible. There's a lot of collaboration. You're working with a product owner, you're working with a Scrum. There's so many people who are involved in the middle, and that generates a lot of activity there. And, it's more results driven, I would say. It takes less time for it to happen, but you have to know what you're doing, because this can be an advantage, and it can also be a disadvantage, because if you don't know what you're doing, it can then be a clunky process, right? It can just go round and round, going into different iterations without coming out with something productive. So you can see that both of them have the advantages and disadvantages. But what I would say to wrap it up is both of the models are great. The ADDIE model is great. You can go to the next slide. The Agile framework is also great. So I'm looking at ways that it can leverage instructional design as using a hybrid approach, because ADDIE and Agile, they can work together. ADDIE is still great. And so ADDIE can be used to enhance Agile in so many ways. So if you're working on a short project, that doesn't have a strict deadline, then definitely you can just stick with your ADDIE and you'll be just fine. But if you're working on a project that is more complex and you have a short period of time to work on, then you might want to consider to use the Agile framework. But then opportunities do exist for you to combine both methods, where you can tell that if you have the Agile framework, then you can be able to incorporate parts of the ADDIE within your Agile framework, and you can still be successful. So the A phase, which is analysis, which is the same as the SAM's, information gathering, both can work the same. They can blend very well because you're still kind of like, in the discovery phase, right? Trying to uncover blind spots. Then when you get to the design and get into development, you can then just adapt and use the Agile framework, where you're looking at different iterations, looking at different cycles, where you can quickly move from one section to the other, revise them, get feedback, and keep moving, and don't have to take that long. And then at the end, you can go ahead and deploy your final product. So that's what I would say. I would, suggest that you can use a hybrid instead of just picking one over the other. We're not dismissing ADDIE. ADDIE is still great. You just have to know what you're going to be using it for. You just have to be able to pick out the benefits, how you can blend it with your Agile to still come up with a performance-driven product. So I hope you found this useful, that you can use in your projects. If any one of you have tried to use a hybrid approach before, you can comment in the chat area, but I'm going to wait in the end to take any questions that you may have regarding leveraging Agile for your projects to improve on performance within your team. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to the next speaker.
Before we move to the next speaker, we'd like to open it up for even just one question from the audience that they may have had on what you just shared. And then from there, we can move on to our next speaker. So we look to you in the chat, our audience who is attending with us live. What questions do you have for Maureen as it relates to her topic? And we'd also like to thank you, Maureen, for what you've shared and how you've just enhanced our understanding and thinking as it relates to lean agile methodology. So the question we have from Max in the audience is, how do you ensure the Agile ID is effective?
As I said, you have to know what you're doing. You have to have experience using Agile. You're not just getting into Agile with your eyes closed. You have to know what the process is, and you have to really understand the way the model works, right? So you have to make sure that within the various cycles, you're able to identify that you're seeing progress or results from each of the steps. If you're not, then you have to go back to the drawing board and see any of the steps that you're missing and trying to work on them. And that's the benefit of Agile, because you can address things in the middle, other than ADDIE, that you have to wait all the way to the end and say, oh, well, I just did the summative evaluation and it's not working, so I'm going to start over again. I'm going to go back to this and fix it. Within Agile, the beauty of it is that within every of the different 3 steps, you can stop and then make some changes, test them, and keep going. And that's why it's called iterative, because of the different cycles that you can take advantage of to make it more productive.
Thank you for that, Maureen.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that wonderful response. And if you have any further questions for Maureen, you can hold those to the end of the webinar, and we'll be sure to address them in the chat. Thank you, Maureen.
You're welcome.
So for our next segment, we will hear from award-winning instructional design consultant, Dr. Max Cropper, PhD and CEO of 5-Star Performance Solutions. Dr. Cropper will speak on lean performance improvement, Cropper's lean performance management model. Dr. Cropper holds both a master's and doctorate degrees in instructional technology, and regarded as an instructional strategy guru by notable organizations that he's worked with, including the US Air Force, Morgan Stanley, the National Institute of Health, and Full Sail University. Dr. Cropper has studied, researched, implemented, and taught best practice instructional design evaluation, and performance improvement strategies for more than 40 years. His clients and peers hail him again as an instructional strategy guru and have said concerning him the following. The 5-star certification course I took from Max Cropper completely changed my perspective as an instructional designer. He's also been celebrated and honored by students who have said of his courses that they were honored to be a part of and to have completed his courses. His courses are highly recommended to any ID who is looking to really lift their skills to the next level. So we are honored to have Dr. Max Cropper to present on lean performance improvement. Dr. Cropper, how are you today?
Good. Thank you, Jody Ann. And thank you for that introduction. Hopefully I can live up to it here. So we can go on to the next slide. So here we are talking about lean performance improvement, right? And my first slide is Bonnie Beresford measurement map, her measurement map. And the first thing that we need to recognize when we're dealing with performance and performance improvement is that we need to be aware of how we're going to achieve the leading indicators that lead to business results and lead to the strategic goals and the vision and mission of the company. And unless our interventions are over in the investment area on the left. So unless our investment and our efforts, our performance improvement efforts, achieve these leading indicators, in this case it's sales training, unless we achieve the customer contacts, the appointments, the product presentations, the proposals presented, and the customer satisfaction index, which leads to the closing ratio, number of referred customers, repeat customers, and unless that leads to new customer sales volume and gross profits and repeat and referral sales volume and gross profits per sale, and total sales volume, total gross profits, and increased market share and increased profitability, then we haven't achieved anything. But while Beresford focuses on measuring the impact of training and other interventions, we need to focus on the investment and what should we be providing as far as training and other performance interventions to achieve these leading indicators and business results. So we can go to the next slide. So you'll notice that Beresford's slide referred to training, sales training. And so the assumption, most of my career, I focused on factor number 3, of which training is a part of achieving competence. If people don't have the knowledge and the skills, then they need some kind of training. And that I teach 5-star instructional design certification programs to help developers, designers and developers develop high quality instruction. But that is only a small part of factors that achieve performance. And so in about 25 years ago, when I had some very heavy participation with ISPI National, I noticed that most of the competency models, the performance improvement models, focused on factors 3 through 7, which are very important. You need competent employees performing to their best. You need the resources and the environment so that they can perform. They should be performing to the goals and standards and business outcomes that the organization wants to achieve. We should evaluate their performance and provide feedback and rewards. And those models also included a little bit of factor number 10. The culture and attitude of the organization is critical to performance. And to a certain extent, they talked about factor number 1, about here I have a commitment. They talked a little bit about motivation, but most of their motivation was under factor number 7. So most of these models were quite behavioral. And I looked at Stephen Covey's models, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People and Principle-Centered Leadership. And I thought, in looking at those models, I thought, the most important factors for performance, achieving performance, are commitment and character, along with competence. And so commitment, proactivity, self-empowerment, and then character, being honest, being full of integrity, having each other's back, having being courageous and empathetic, having an abundance mentality. And so I thought we need to put these characteristics at the forefront of our model. And then also 8 and 9, we need to have leadership, excellent leadership and teamwork that make it possible to perform. And all that being said, unless you have lean processes in the middle, lean process improvement, then you're not going to succeed. Because if you have a bad system or if you have bad processes, then they sabotage all of these other factors. And you'll notice underneath the lean process improvement, you have the provision process, which is the internal process by which a company provides products and services. And you also have the consumption process, which is the process by which the consumer or the client or the customer receives the products and services. And both of those need to be efficient and effective. And so let's go on to the next slide. So what I created, we're talking about Agile and Lean. This is a quick and clean way, using this template to identify the desired situation, the current situation, the causes for the current situation, and recommended solutions for these 11 factors. And so working with stakeholders, you can go through this process and identify, basically do a needs analysis and come up with recommended solutions. So go ahead to the next slide. So recently in the National ISPI conference, I taught a session on this performance improvement model, and I had participants help design go through the template and design a performance improvement plan. And so this is an example of the first factor for commitment and self-empowerment. You can see our customer service representative is kind of frustrated. And of course, the desired situation that is that these representatives can make most of the decisions by themselves. The current situation is they refer 25% of the decisions to supervisors. The cause is they've had fear and self-doubt. They have a pattern of getting in trouble for making the wrong decisions. And then other representatives are always deferring decisions, so they might as well. And the solution is to provide appropriate guidance to make most decisions. And so what we would do is we would go through not just this factor number 1, but all 11 factors and identify, again, the desired situation, the causes, and recommended solutions. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So by doing this, we've focused to an extent on factors 1 through 10 and somewhat on 11. But lean process improvement is really important. And maybe we should have addressed it first. If we go to the next slide. So Guy Wallace is one of the gurus of performance improvement. And here he's quoting Gary Brumler, another guru. And Gary says, you put a good performer against a bad system, and the system wins every time. And this is really a serious problem. And Gary, over on the left, claimed that 90% of performance problems are tied to the environment, not the performer. And so we need to look at the environment and the system. So let's go to the next slide. Maybe we should do that first. So I had an experience where I ordered a couple of HDMI cables from a company. I ordered 2 10-foot cables. As you can see, I got a 10-foot cable and a 3-foot cable. So I was frustrated. So if we go to the next slide, I created a current state map and a future state map. We'll look first at the current state map. And just briefly, I mapped out the process of contacting chat customer support 3 times. And so the first time they told me it was like a marketplace provider. And that's after waiting for 2 hours on chat and speaking for 5 minutes. And so I said, okay, you'll take care of it, hopefully. And then they didn't do anything. I didn't hear anything. So 2 weeks later, I went to chat again. And this time they told me to send a photo of the products, which I did. And then nothing happened. And I wait 2 more weeks. And then I chatted again. They said, okay, you need to send those products back in. And I was very upset by then. And I haven't gotten back with them. And now it's probably been 7 or 8 months. So the lead time has been many months. And the value added time, which wasn't value added, was only about 55 minutes, as you can see over on the right. And only 50% complete and accurate. And so you can use these value stream maps, if we go to the next slide, to identify the current situation, and then you can do a future state map. And in this map, the lead time, basically, this is the way I wish it had happened, that I contacted them once, I only waited for 10 minutes. They said they'd send me a new cable, they sent me a new cable, and the lead time was 17 days, 55 minutes. That's the total elapsed time. The value added time should have been 55 minutes. So ultimately, if you can map out the future state, now this is from the customer point of view. They would also need to map out from the organization point of view. So unless you also map out performance improvement, you could have a bad system, a bad process. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So you need to address all of these factors in a rapid and agile way, and so that you can get optimal results. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cropper. Appreciate you sharing. And I'd like to open it up for if you have a question, please do post it on the chat or raise your hand so that we can acknowledge you. That it was a great presentation. So the audience echoes my sentiments about the information that you shared. So it seems though we no questions at this time. However, we know that the way that our minds work, questions come up after the fact. And so if that is the case for you as you are tuning in, feel free end of the presentation. Proper.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Our third final panelist and the webinar leader, we have Mr. Jonathan Tessier. Jonathan Tessier is an accomplished professional with 20+ years of success in the fields of coaching, training, instructional design, and graphic design. Hello, Jonathan. How are you today?
Jody Ann, I'm doing great. How's it going for you?
It's going well here. Thanks for asking.
Good deal. Well, let me round up our discussion today around Agile and Lean with 3 concepts that I want to first just briefly talk about and then pull them all together. And that is what we've learned so far about Agile and continuous improvement, and this other concept of visual management and the role that plays when we're talking about agile and continuous improvement. So just briefly to remind you again of agile, which was covered so great earlier here. Agile is an iterative approach, and this is an important word that we need to talk about. And so if you go to the next slide, one of the reasons why this iterative approach is so important is because it provides an opportunity for lessons learned, okay? And what we want to do, of course, and what was covered with Agile so far in this presentation was the idea that we want to add value to our customers, right? And along the way, we have these iterations, and we want to pause and know whether or not our iterations are working and getting us to where we need to go. And so there's some important questions we need to ask, and I have them right here. We want to ask what went well, what didn't go so well, and what could we also improve? This is how we can become continually more effective using Agile and continuous improvement. The idea here is to continually reflect back on how we did so that we can become more effective. That's what it's all about. And so when I was thinking about that, I thought of this idea of visual management. But before I talk about visual management, let's also just remind ourselves about this very important concept of continuous improvement. So next slide. Now, obviously, the idea of continuous improvement is the idea of identifying opportunities where we can streamline work and we can reduce waste. And so let's pull apart this concept for a moment so that we really understand what it's all about. So I actually want to first start with the word improvement. And when we think about what is meant by the word improvement, we get this idea that we want to eliminate anything that's not adding value during this whole process. And when we think about things that could be improved, we can think about, well, there's positive things that we could enhance. There's negative things that we could reduce or eliminate. And then there's new things that we could incorporate. So lots of opportunities are in this idea of improvement, things to add, things to take away. Now let's switch over to the word continuous. What do we mean when we use this word continuous? Well, basically, continuous means something never stops. It doesn't matter how good you are today. If you're not better next month or tomorrow, you're no longer agile, you're no longer lean, you're no longer continuously improving. Remember that continuous implies that something's being done always, not just occasionally. And that's what we need to keep in mind when we look at the word continuous improvement. Don't take it for granted in this phrase, continuous improvement. We must have this never-ending effort to do this continuous work of getting better. But in order to do this never-ending effort, we have to first expose and eliminate the root causes of problems and the things that are causing the waste to be there in the first place. So when you think back to Agile and this idea of doing these small incremental steps or iterations, remember that when it comes to continuous improvement, there is all these little small changes that we do end up resulting in this massive change of great magnitude by the end. And this is where the need for visual management comes into play with both Agile and this idea of lean improvement. And I have a real simple thing that I absolutely want you to remember. If you've got a pen, go ahead and write it down. But this is at the heart of it, and that is that you can't manage what you don't see. Now, that's such an important truth, I want to repeat it for you. You cannot manage what you do not see. That goes for anybody in any kind of a leadership position or in a management position, a supervisor, but it also plays a part when we're talking about improving a process, when we're designing. And when I think about agile instructional design, you know, the whole idea is to really be collaborative and engage with stakeholders and clients. You're living the spirit of this idea of managing what you can't manage what you don't see. And so you bring in eyes. You let everybody look at what you're doing, because that's the way that improvement and iterative steps to get to something better happen, is by everybody looking at something. So the need for visual management is absolutely critical in any process, in any development of a product or a training program. And so that's why I thought, this is an important thing we need to make sure people are aware of. So next slide. Now, why is visual management so important, other than what I've already said to you? Well, first and foremost, if you want to get rid of waste, you have to cultivate the ability to see it. But just how easy is it to see waste, and are we primed to actually look at it? I want to give you a story that I think illustrates perfectly what I'm talking about. So sit back for a moment, relax, maybe put down your pen, grab some popcorn. And here's a little story I want to tell you to help illustrate what I'm talking about. This story is called the Joshua Tree. So many years ago, I received a tree identification book for Christmas. I was at my parents' home, and after all the gifts had been opened, I decided to go out and identify the trees in the neighborhood. Before I went out, I read through part of the book. The first tree in the book was the Joshua tree, because it took only 2 clues to identify it. Now, the Joshua tree is a really weird-looking tree, and I looked at that picture and said to myself, oh, we don't have that kind of tree in Northern California. This is a weird-looking tree. I would know if I saw that tree, and I'd never seen one before. So I took my book and I went outside. My parents lived in a cul-de-sac of 6 homes. 4 of those homes had Joshua trees in the front yard. I have lived in that house for 13 years, and I have never seen a Joshua tree. I took a walk around the block, and there must have been a sale at the nursery when everyone was landscaping their homes. For at least 80% of the homes had Joshua trees in the front yards, and I had never seen one before. Once I was conscious of the tree, once I could name it, I then saw it everywhere. This is exactly the point. Once you can name something, see it, you're conscious of it. You have power over it. You own it. You can control it, and you can do something with it. Now, this story came from one of my graphic design books that I read in school. And the whole idea was this idea of making something visual so that you could manage it. Go ahead and put in the chat anything else that might have stood out for you in this story. What are you taking away after listening to it? And let me throw another question out for you to also reflect on. What makes us not see what's right in front of us? That might be even more of a tricky question, right? What makes us not see what's right in front of us? Yep, someone said familiarity. Absolutely, right? We get so familiar with something that we don't even notice that it's there. And how many of you have experienced the opposite of that? Perhaps you bought a vehicle, and the moment you bought that vehicle thinking you'd never seen one before, you all of a sudden start to see it all the time on the road. Yeah, it's pretty cool, and here's I want to go with that familiarity concept for a moment. I think that's a really good point, and I'm going to give you another little story to kind of illustrate this challenge of visually seeing things that are right there. Yes, thank you. Losing focus as well. Great example. So here's another story for you. This one's really small. It's more of an anecdote. Two little fish are swimming along in the ocean one day when they meet an older fish who casually asks them, "Hello, fellas, how's the water today?" They responded with equal casualness, "Fine, sir," and then they swam on. After a moment, one of the younger fish looks at the other fish and asks, "What the hell is water?" That's that idea of familiarity, right? That's the idea of us not seeing something that's right in front of us. Like you heard in the Joshua's tree story, recognizing anything requires us to shift our perspective. This is how we end up seeing the waste in a process. But not just do we end up seeing what needs to be eliminated, but guess what we also see? We start to see what's possible also. We get so conditioned to what's going on around us that we don't even see what's right in front of us. We just have to stop and focus and not just see objects and things, but also see the spaces that exist between those objects and things. In those seemingly empty spaces around us, there's really a lot of things taking place. I want to give you one more analogy that's going to help you with this importance of visual management. So next slide. And the next slide after that, sorry. Okay. The analogy I want to give you is a common one in manufacturing circles that are looking to implement this idea of lean. And what I'd like you to think about here is this idea of a boat on the water. And if you look in the first panel there, you're in the boat and you're cruising all along on the water and everything seems fine, right? And the reason everything is so fine is because the water level is so high that you skip right over all those dangerous rocks that are just below the surface. But guess what? If you reduced the water, then the dangerous rocks start to pop up and show through the surface, right? And then when you know that they're there, can you then remove them? And guess what? By the end panel, you are cruising along on the water, but you don't need as much water as you did before. That's what the idea of lean is about. That's the idea what Agile is all about. So that you can make those rocks, those dangerous things appear and address them quickly so that in the end, you have success. Dr. Wayne Dwyer said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Next slide. So let me leave you with this when you're thinking about lean development, when you're thinking about Agile, when you're thinking about continuous improvement, this idea of visual management and its importance. Visual management provides real-time information and feedback that is necessary for Agile and continuous improvement to work. Making work visible exposes wastes that are otherwise hidden. Seeing allows you to comprehend things quickly. This creates the foundation for questions, and from questions come the solutions. If you want Agile to be successful and to enhance the concept of continuous improvement, don't forget the important role visual management plays in all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the food for thought concerning the lean Agile methodology. And at this time, we'd like to open it up for questions specifically for you and then for the other presenters as well. So for those of you who are joining us live, this is your time to ask your questions and get your answers. What questions do you have for Jonathan on what he just presented? We don't have a question yet, but we do have a bit of appreciation from Jenna about the fish story. Thank you for that. And I actually enjoyed that story as well.
Good deal. Thank you.
And I particularly appreciated the statement that you made about the fact that we cannot manage what we do not see. Very important. Yes, our audience is expressing thanks for the presentation, and we have a question from Leroy asking, what are 2 ways to see a fresh perspective, to see something differently?
I'll give you an example. Something differently is change what you normally do. So for example, I take a route to the gym where I do my exercise class. And it's a route that goes north to south with where I live. And it's funny, when I go that route, I see the same trees, the same angles of the houses, the same mailbox, the same direction of the mountains behind the houses. And then normally when I leave the gym, I come back a different way, okay? But the other day, I finally said, you know what? I'm going to go back the way I keep coming. And it was funny, the moment I did that, I saw the houses I used to look at and the trees I look at on the way there, I saw them from a different perspective. And all of a sudden, they looked very different. And I noticed things I hadn't seen before. So think about your routines and think about how you approach things from a routine perspective. And what can you do to sort of flip them, just like a coin, where you're seeing them from a different perspective, and just notice what pops up when you change that perspective, what you're training, and that will help you to see things in a different way. What about issues that are not visible? Not quite sure how to answer that. I think the goal is to try and make things visible, grow awareness, or bring them to the front somehow. So I'm not 100% sure it might be referencing, but that's the idea, is what you do to make them visible or bring them up as topic, which is another way of making something visible.
Thank you for that response, Jonathan. Do we have any further questions from our audience?
When others are so comfortable with their view, how do you encourage them to explore a new perspective? That's a really good question, because all of us get very comfortable with how we see things, and that becomes the simplicity of our world. And simplicity, I don't mean in the sense of it's not important or anything like that. It's just, I get it. I mean, we live with so much visual stimuli, so much going on in our worlds, that sometimes the brain wants to shuttle that down and just stay with the tried and true. the encouragement of seeing things from a different perspective is why I mentioned the idea that there are possibilities as well. And what happens when people don't shift their views, now I'm going at it from a coaching perspective as opposed from a training perspective, is that we get stuck. If nothing changes and we don't look at anything different, we get stuck. And that stuckness will start to show up in somebody's life. They'll feel that stuckness. And they'll not quite be able to put their finger on it. That is one way to encourage people to look at things from a different perspective, so that possibilities, good changes, growth can enter into a person's life.
Thank you for that advice, Jonathan. Any further questions from our live audience? We have time for one more question. Well, it seems as though there are no further questions, but quite a bit of praise for each of our speakers today. So we want to extend our thanks to every single presenter on this topic of Lean Agile methodology. And appreciate you for your time, for sharing your expertise and your wisdom for those of us who have joined live and those who will be watching the replay from our professional community. So with that, we want to be sure to invite you to join us at our next webinar, especially if you've gotten quite a bit out of this one. Our next webinar will broadcast live on Thursday, June 24th, 2021 at noon Eastern Time. On that day, we will touch on the topic of engineering in everyday life, addressing the global grand challenges of the 21st century. For that webinar, we will explore the technological possibilities and engineering solutions that are just within our grasps, as well as some that lie just beyond our imaginations, and what modern day engineers are doing to extend our reach. Join us live and expand your horizons as our panel of emerging technological thinkers and engineering thought leaders discuss and explore some of the grand challenges for engineering in the 21st century. Everything from sustainability to health, security, and even the joy of living. Mark your calendars for June 24th at noon Eastern Time so that you don't miss this mind-expanding discussion. After this webinar, as well as the one we will be hosting in June, we will share the link to each webinar recording for you to enjoy again and again. We invite you to share your thoughts in the chat as we close for any thoughts that you have on this webinar, in the chat for those of you who are joining us live, and in the comments for those of you watching the replay. And if you need any of the resources from this webinar, or you'd like to connect directly with any of the panelists, please be sure to reach out with your name and email address for the webinar resources. So again, we'd like to thank our illustrious panelists for sharing their expertise on this powerful topic. And we'd like to thank you, our audience, for joining us and for lending us your ear. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next monthly multidisciplinary webinar. Take care.